Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming in spite of this horrible weather we are getting. This usually is, in normal circumstances, a great place to be holding an evening seminar, because at about this time of the day, the lights of the city will be beginning to appear. But in this soup that we're in, I'm afraid you're not going to see very much. I am Professor Chua Beng-Huat. I am at the Cultural Asia Research Institute. I'm in charge of the Cultural Studies in Asia Research Cluster, which is responsible for this evening's seminar on Tsai Ming-liang. For those of you who are attending events organized by the Asia Research Institute for the first time, let me just say a few words about the institute itself. The Asia Research Institute is an academic research center at the National University of Singapore. Our offices are in the Bukit Timah campus rather than at Kent Ridge. We are the only fully academic institute in that we do not report to any ministries on political or economic or any other issues. We do not do any policy studies. We just do seriously academic stuff. Had it not been the case, we would not have put on this particular seminar at all, because I'm sure very few of the policy makers in Singapore will even know who is Tsai Ming-liang, let alone watch his films. Within the Institute, there are 7 different areas of research, among which is the Cultural Studies in Asia Research Group. In addition to that, there is a research focus on Asian urbanism, on religion and globalization, on migration, changing family structures, and science and technology. And just in case there are some really interesting people that fall out of all those 6 groups, there is an open category that we could give a fellowship to. So it's a very active research place. At any one time, there's about 50 or so academic research scholars of various level of seniority. And this evening, we have the privilege to listen to one of Singapore's scholars who has been in Britain for a while. He is a multi-talented young man. Relative to me, he's a young man. Some of you might actually have been here because you know who he is, because he actually is, in addition to being a film scholar, he's also a Chinese essayist. He's published, some of his writings have been published at Linger and in various collections. So, Professor Lim Chong-Hwee is currently still in Exeter University in Britain. Soon will return to Asia. And he is one of the leading figures internationally on Chinese cinema, particularly with his energy in organizing events and journals and in publications. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Chinese Cinema, and he also has been organizing a series of conferences around Chinese cinema, and they will be meeting in Singapore on July 1st and 2nd, right? He has been at the Asia Research Institute for 3 months as a visiting fellow, and the book on Tsai Ming-liang is finished. But is it in print yet? Not yet. But it's finished. You will see that there is a blurb circulating. This talk comes out of that particular work. So, Tsai, please.
Thank you, Big Hwee, for your very kind introduction. And thanks to everyone for coming to this talk today in this weather. I really feel like today, particularly, I'm living in the Tsai Ming-liang film. For those of you who have seen his 2006 film, I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, which is set in Kuala Lumpur and also happens to have smoke coming from Indonesia, would know what I'm talking about. And if you run out of face masks, you can do what the characters in the film do, which is to use a styrofoam bowl and tie a few strings around it, and there you have a face mask. Okay, so like I said, thank you for coming to this talk and giving me this opportunity to share my research with you. Let me begin by giving you a little background as to how I came about to work on this project. I've always been fascinated, some would say obsessed even, by the films of the Malaysian-born, Taiwan-based film director Tsai Ming-liang. Like many Chinese-educated Malaysians of his generation, Tsai went to Taiwan in 1977 to pursue his undergraduate education before staying on in the island to become, in the order of his career, director of a theatre troupe, screenplay writer, TV drama director, and since 1992, a featured film director. There are many approaches to studying Tsai's films, and I've discussed his early films in relation to queer poetics in my first book, Celluloid Comrades. However, over the years that I've been following his work, the most typical responses, including those from some of my friends, whom I shall not name and shame in public, to Tsai's films, have tended to be along these lines: that his films are slow and boring, that nothing happens in his films, that he doesn't know how to tell a story, etc. So I decided to take these responses seriously and started formulating some preliminary research questions along these lines. So firstly, what is slowness in cinema? When we say that the film is slow, what do we mean by that? And more importantly, can slowness be measured or quantified? If so, how? Next, what makes a film or a film watching experience boring? Note that I put boring in quotes. And when we watch a film, what do we expect, or more precisely, expect to happen within the film's narrative? When we say that nothing happens in the film, what is this thing that is supposed to happen? And finally, must films tell stories, and are they expected to tell stories in a certain way? So armed with these preliminary questions, I began thinking and writing on the subject of Tsai Ming-liang and the cinema of slowness, first in the form of an MA option module that I offered at the University of Exeter since 2006, and eventually culminating in a book that will be published early next year by the University of Hawaii Press. So if I'm allowed to do a bit of shameless self-promotion, you have a piece of yellow paper on that that publicizes the book. And I'm glad to tell you that the price of the book is actually $45 US and not $55 US. Okay. So in today's talk, I hope to give you a sense of how I've tried to address some of these questions, and I look forward to hearing your responses about the notion of slowness, both in cinema and in life. My talk will be organized into three sections: the concept of slowness, the context of slowness, and finally, an analysis of slowness using a clip from a Tsai Ming-liang film. Okay, the concept of slowness has to do first and foremost with time and temporality. And time, as we all know, is a very profound and complex notion that scientists and philosophers have over the ages been trying to account for. In his book about time, astrophysicist Adam Pheng combines the twin narratives of cosmic time and human time to show how they embrace our most intimate and most personal experience of the world, the very frame of human life. The key word here for me is experience. For time, or slowness, is to a great extent a matter of perception and experience, and it can never merely be an objective temporal measurement. Any engagement with time, even in the form of watching a film, is invariably contingent upon a variety of constantly changing factors, from a person's disposition, his or her psychical and physical state at the time, to the immediate and larger environment, etc. One person's idea and experience of slowness could well be that of another person's speed. It is somewhat surprising that, given the centrality of time in film, very little has been written on the specific subject of cinematic temporality. One approach to the analysis of speed or slowness in film is to look at the average shot length, or ASL, of a film, a method favored by a very famous US film scholar called David Bordwell. ASL is computed by taking the total length of the film and divided by the total number of shots, thus deriving at the figure expressed in seconds. So, for example, Tsai Ming-liang's 2003 film, Goodbye Dragon in Busan, is 4,685 seconds long, and it contains 86 shots, making the ASL 54.48 seconds. That is to say, each shot of this film is, on average, lasts about nearly a minute. Okay? And to put this in some kind of context, Bordwell reckons that the ASL of a 1990s Hollywood film is between 2 to 8 seconds. So try and imagine a film, when you watch a film, there's a cut to a different shot every 2 to 8 seconds. So 1 second, 2 second, cut. 1 second, 2 second, cut. And then imagine for a Tsai Ming-liang film, you actually have to wait for a whole minute before the next shot appears. Okay, so compare this to Woody Allen's film, say Manhattan, which has an ASL of 18 seconds, and Mighty Aphrodite with an ASL of 36 seconds. So I provided in the handout that you have with you, the yellow handout, the figures of Tsai Ming-liang's films. Someone just asked me earlier, did I compute this? Luckily, I got a research grant and employed a research assistant to, to do this for me. So if you look at the figures, you will see that the average shot length, which is in the third column, increased over the course of his career. So in his debut film, Rebels of the Neon God, 青少年哪吒, the average shot length was about 19 seconds per shot. And his most recent film, Visage, Lien, is about 90 seconds per shot. That's a minute and a half. Okay? And at the same time, I've also taken into consideration whether the shots contain camera movements. So if you look at the last column, which is percentage of shots with camera movement, that has also correspondingly decreased over the course of his career. So that in his first film, you see that about 40% of the shots contain camera movement, whereas in his latest film, only about 10% of the shots contain camera movement. Okay? So, so broadly speaking, Tsai's shots have got longer, but with less camera movement over his career. Okay. This approach is, of course, I'm sure you're thinking about that already, by no means scientific or foolproof. As such, I have tried to complement the ASL figures with a list of other visual factors that we should take into account when we talk about slowness or speed in film. So, for example, content of the shot. Right, a long take with nothing or very little happening is different from one full of action and dialogue, for example. These are all fairly obvious points. Secondly, direction of actors and setting. Elements of performance and mise-en-scène, which is how you organize the elements in a shot, can attract or distract from attention. The still here I've got, some of you will recognize, is a still from a Russian film called Russian Ark, and it is a one-take film, which involves, I think, is it 500 actors orchestrated over the course of 90 minutes or whatever, but it's one take. But a lot of things happen during that take. And Alfred Hitchcock's Rope 1948 film contains only 10 long takes. So these are good examples to illustrate the first 2 points, that is the content of the shot and also the direction of actors and setting. Camera movement. A static long take, such as the one in Roy Andersson, who is a Swedish director, Roy Andersson's Youth the Living, will have a very different effect from that of a tracking shot, like the 9-minute and 16-second opening of the Hungarian film director Bela Tar's Second Tango. That is a fantastic 7-hour-long film, if anyone is interested. The opening shot itself is 9 minutes and 16 seconds. Camera angle and camera distance. An unusual camera angle, a close-up or a long shot, will affect differently the perception or experience of slowness. And finally, pacing. The combination of the pacing of diegetic action, dialogue, and camera movement will have an impact on the perceived speed of a shot or a film. Okay, it's a lot to take in, it's all quite technical, so do bear with me. So to address some of my preliminary questions, I propose narratorial subject and duration as 2 aspects that are central to this concept of cinematic slowness. In addition, I suggest that these 2 aspects manifest themselves in the following concrete cinematic terms. Narratively, a trope of waiting that may, for some spectators, become a source of boredom. Durationally, the use of long takes and what Deleuze calls the time image, which I won't go into here. I'm here using a book to help me. This is a book called Nothing Happens, and it studies the films of a female film director called Chantal Akerman. So if the films of Chantal Akerman can be summed up as suggests the title of the book devoted to the study, Nothing Happens, that's the title of the book there. This phrase, I would suggest, should not be taken merely as a descriptor of the property of supposedly slow films. Rather, it should lead us to pose a more fundamental question about what qualifies as a legitimate subject in film, the very notion of thing, and what counts as nothing within a film's narrative. Tellingly, Tsai Ming-liang's view on cinematic temporality is illustrated via an example on waiting. Asked in an interview about his notion of time, Tsai explained that he often felt when he watched other people's films that the time in them isn't real enough. It's either too short or too long. Those are Tsai's words. He also talked about the ways in which his films differ in their relation to time. And below is a long quote by Tsai Ming-liang. So Tsai says, so for instance, in some films, to show that the hero has been waiting for quite a time, you'll be shown 5 cigarette stubs in the ashtray. Right? I think we all have seen films like that, right? You're shown an ashtray full of cigarette stubs. And Tsai goes on to say, normally, for a scene like that, I will film the character for as long as it takes him to smoke 5 cigarettes. That's real time, but it's very difficult to handle because the audience will get bored. But I think I do this deliberately because I want them to feel that the hero is in a state of anxiety, waiting for something that may not happen. I don't just want them to know logically that the hero has been waiting for a long time. No, I also want them to feel this real waiting time. Right? So those of you who have seen Tsai Ming-liang's films, you would know that that's exactly what he does. So with filmmakers such as Tsai, taking a literal approach to temporal realism using single long takes, the audacity or scandal, depending on one's view, of a cinema of slowness lies precisely in its representation of content that seems at variance with the duration accorded it. That is to say, It is not simply that nothing happens in these films, but that it takes too long for nothing to happen. But how long is too long? And does duration necessarily correlate to boredom? It must be qualified here that boredom does not occur only when a film is too slow, because fast films can also bore. Okay, I often find a lot of fast action films actually very boring because it's so predictable. And like the experience of time and slowness itself, boredom is highly subjective. In the philosophy of boredom, Lars Svensson notes instances of situative boredom. Here he's drawing on Heidegger, whom I won't go into either. Situative boredom in which it is not time itself or the things themselves, but the situation in which they are placed that can give rise to boredom. Thus, Richard Misak suggests that cinema is the privileged site of situative boredom because it imposes duration. Similarly, you're probably feeling quite bored now because you're in a situation in which you have been told that the talk will last 45 minutes, and unless you woke up, you are trapped in this place and have to listen to me finish this boring talk. Okay, so on this note, let me move on to the next part of my talk, which is on the context of slowness. When I work on this project at the turn of the 21st century, there are two phenomena on slowness that have emerged, one cinematic and the other socio-cultural. On the one hand, critics and scholars have begun to identify a body of contemporary films that can be described as a cinema of slowness. On the other hand, a slow movement has also appeared in Europe and elsewhere. I'll map out this context by using a question posed by Milan Kundera in his novella Slowness. And the question is, why has the pleasure of slowness disappeared? This question, I would suggest, can only be approached through historicization, for there's no uniform appreciation for slowness, that is to say, pleasure for some, pain for others. Nor is there a singular explanation for its supposed disappearance. Indeed, the first question to ask is not so much why slowness has seemingly disappeared, but rather where and when an ideology of slowness reigns supreme, and where and when it has lost its currency. It is only by identifying exact moments in which, and precise locations wherein slowness manifests in specific configurations of knowledge and power, can we begin to understand why it has been regarded as pain or pleasure, and why it has appeared or disappeared. It is arguable that slowness is mainly associated with pain, as in the expression, painfully slow. So here I have cited for you a review of Tsai's 1998 film, The Whole Dong, which actually features quite fabulous musical numbers. But this is a review on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, so it's a random review by an anonymous person. And the review bears the title, Good but Painfully Slow. And this is in the original. I haven't added those dots there, right? That is the original. And the following comments. Compared to this, Tarkovsky is a speed freak. Compared to this, Bellatar is MTV. Right? For those of you who know these directors, you would understand it in context. Compared to this, the movie Russian Ark is a roller coaster ride. I've just described three of the slowest experience I've ever known, and this one tops them all. Okay? I think if you watch The Whole, I don't think you would actually agree with this, but anyway, this is this person's take. So, this guy, and I'm guessing is a guy, clearly knows what he's talking in relation to film. For the examples he listed are among the usual suspects of what has been called a cinema of slowness. So this is a list of film directors that are usually discussed, in the context of cinema of slowness. You may recognize some of the names, you may not, but don't worry if you don't. So, well, there have been, throughout the history of cinema, films that can be regarded as slow, however problematic or subjective the qualifications may be, the discourse on slowness in cinema is fairly new. Within this discourse, the names of some usual suspects make regular appearances, as you can see up here, while others from an earlier era are routinely cited as precursors of this tendency, people like Ozu, Antonioni, Tarkovsky, Chantal Akerman, with artists associated with avant-garde filmmaking and video art also often invoked as kindred spirits, people like Andy Warhol, Michael Snow. This cinema of slowness has appeared in many parts of the world to address both the speeding up of modern life and the treatment of time in narrative films. And in tandem with the emergence of cinema of slowness, a slow movement has also been building up in the social sphere. In 1989, McDonald's plan to open a branch at the foot of the Spanish Steps in Rome triggered demonstration at the proposed site, and the slow food movement was founded in Paris in December that year. Since then, many organizations and enterprises promoting the concept of slow living have flourished. As Carl Honore states in his best-selling book, this movement inevitably overlaps with the anti-globalization crusade, and a genuinely slow world implies nothing less than a lifestyle revolution. Within this discourse on slowness, globalization is seen to be having a particularly homogenizing effect on culture, leading to what some has called the McDonaldization of society, in which both food and people have become supersized. By contrast, the slow movement advocates downsizing to the level of the local and places emphasis on organic origins, artisanal processes, and ethical products. These values are anathema to speed, which is seen as the arch-enemy of slowness. Though there has not been a corresponding speed movement over the same period, it can be argued that speed is so ubiquitous in modern life that it passes as natural. Hence, its ideological force, like the naturalizing ones in relation to gender and sexuality, for example, must be unveiled and challenged precisely because of its seeming transparency. In his book, The Speed Handbook, Ender Duffy pinpoints the emergence of the cult of speed to the turn of the 20th century, when the invention of the motor car was, and I'm quoting from him here, when the invention of the motor car was repackaged as a sensation and a pleasure to be put at the disposal of the individual consumer, a modernist mobile architecture which offered a new pleasure to the masses. End of quote. A century later, the ideology of speed, like the inescapable car advertisements on our multimedia screens, has become the mainstay of modern consciousness, to the extent that any celebration of slowness is immediately cast as either reacting to or reactionary in relation to speed and out of date. In film, this cult of speed is exemplified by car chase sequences in thrillers. A cinema of speed can accelerate to an extent that vision becomes a blur, the effective erasure of the visible, like a car chase sequence set in Moscow in the film The Bourne Supremacy. Okay, I'm going to show you a clip of the car chase scene. I'm sure many of you know the scene very well. My challenge to you today is try and count the number of shots contained in this 5-minute sequence. Okay, so I'll play the film, but while you're watching it, try and count how many shots there are within this sequence. Okay. patient. How many shots are there in this sequence? Anyone? Wendy? 261. Wow, that's very precise. Anyone want to challenge that claim? Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have the definitive answer because it's too quick for your eyes to register. But I've tried this in class, and we reckon it's about 250 or so. Give or take 10%. So I think you're probably right. So again, to put it in some kind of context, with 250 shots, about 250 shots in about 5 minutes, this sequence averages barely 1 second per shot and crashes innumerable cars in the process. In this sequence, visuality is displaced by kinesthetic and adrenaline as the speed of editing arguably exceeds what the human eye can register. The shots are clearly meant not to be seen but to be sensed. So to put it in some kind of context, the number of shots in this 5-minute sequence is about 3 times the total number of shots in Tsai Ming-liang's Goodbye Dragon Inn. So 5-minute sequence has 3 times the number of shots of the entire film by Tsai Ming-liang, which contains only 86 shots in the entire film. Okay, so returning to the social context, and my context here is mainly Euro-American. While conspicuous consumption was the hallmark of the leisure class in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, 100 years later, sustainability has become the buzzword for intellectuals, activists, and middle-class consumers, marking a paradigm shift from quantity to quality, from waste to taste, from speed to slowness. It is no accident that both the cinema of slowness and the slow movement appeared at the turn of the 21st century. While they may not feed off one another in a conscious manner, their simultaneous emergence bespeak a desire, albeit expressed in distinct social spheres and in disparate ways, to formulate a different relationship to time and space. More specifically, the slow movement can be seen as an attempt not only to counter the compression of time and space brought about by technological and other changes, but also to bridge the widening gap between the global and the local under the intense speed of globalization. Together with the rise of eco-criticism, the environmental movement, and the anti-globalization brigade, the slow movement signals a political turn in public consciousness that now sees the local as implicated within the global. This consciousness is reflected in slogans such as "Think globally, act locally," and in the popularity of books such as No Logo and Fast Food Nation. As for a cinema of slowness, given that we're looking at an Anglophone discourse that has emerged largely out of consumption of such films at international film festivals and art house cinemas in Europe, North America, and Australia, and I will be very curious to hear what the discourse of slowness or an understanding of the cinema of slowness is in Singapore, if anyone would like to tell me during the question and answer session. It might be tempting to see it as, in part, a form of Western consumption of post-colonial visuality with its attendant politics of artering and exoticization. However, while such a mode of consumption cannot be totally discounted, Europe's strong representation on the list of usual suspects, shown here, problematizes this reading, whereas the conspicuous absence of directors from the United States, with the exception of Gus Van Sant, reinforces the association of Hollywood cinema with speed. It would be impossible to generalize why slow films have appeared quite independently of, yet somehow resonating with each other across these geographical locales over the past 2 decades or so. A European aesthetic of slowness in both everyday life and film is arguably born out of material comfort because the societies that underpin such ideological investment can quite literally afford to do so in their late capitalist stage of economic development. Slowness for Europe is at once temporal and material luxury, which it can aspire to and attain. On the other hand, a turn to slowness in rapidly developing regions such as East Asia may arise from an anxiety toward wholesale modernization and industrialization, and thus a desire to hold on to a less hectic pace associated with an agricultural past. Yet, as we know, within each country and each region, There exist huge income inequalities and urban-rural divides that complicate a simple dichotomy along the lines of so-called first world versus third world economies. Argentinian director Lisandro Alonso's film Freedom derives its temporality, like the Welsh film Sleep Furiously and Hungarian director Bellatar's film The Turin Horse, from the daily routines of peasant life. The condition of ennui may also transcend urban-rural divides, as well as cultural divides, so that the boredom experienced by the youth can be translated into similarly glacial temporality in Jia Zhangke's Unknown Pleasures and Bruno Dumont's The Life of Jesus. Furthermore, a spiritual or poetic dimension often finds its expression in a more considered pace or in the form of cyclical temporality, such as the films of Apichatpong Muraseta-kun and Theo Angelopoulos. In the final part of my talk, we will look at an example from a Tsai Ming-liang film, from his 2006 film I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, Hei Yan Quan. Let us watch a clip from the film. Okay, set in Kuala Lumpur, I Don't Want to Sleep Alone opens with a 90-second shot of the interior of the room where a comatose man is lying on the bed. An aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute is playing on the cassette recorder cum radio on the desk to the right of the bed. And the curtain by the window above the desk is blown lightly by the wind from the exterior. This is not the shot that you've seen. This is the opening shot of the film that I'm describing here. The beauty of the shot lies not just in the visualization of the otherwise invisible wind, but also in the gentle manner and the wind caresses the curtain's soft fabric, instilling a sense of stillness paradoxically through movement. This stillness is accentuated by the immobility of a human figure in the frame, denying didactic action by granting primacy to a comatose man who cannot act. Why open a film with a static long take of an everyday moment in the life of a comatose man? With Tsai Ming-liang's regular actor Li Kangsheng, whom you saw in the clip here, playing two characters who both require care, the didactic action of Tsai's film centers around acts of caring that depend on what Tennessee Williams has memorably called the kindness of strangers. This kindness is shown to the injured man, as was seen in the clip, who was first discovered staggering onto the side of a road near Purdue Jail by Rawang, a construction worker from Bangladesh, and his fellow migrant workers. They decide to carry him back, together with the discarded mattress they picked up in the skip, to their living quarters where Rawang would assume the duty of care. In her essay on queerscapes in contemporary Hong Kong cinema, Helen Hoxie Leong writes about how some cinematic representations foster new modalities of intimacy that flourish in a world where strangers need to and do take care of each other. Echoing Tsai's comments cited earlier on time and waiting, in I Don't Want to Sleep Alone, the on-screen representation that we've just seen in the clip is not the idea, but the very process of caring. In this scene, in the scene that we just watched, Rawang takes some pills to the injured man, and realizing that the injured man has a fever, improvises an ice bag with a packet of cold drink. In a static long take, more than 2 or 3 minutes of the short's duration are devoted to Rawang's improvisation. First, Rawang ties the cold drink packet and places it on the injured man's forehead. It falls off. Rawang then finds a plastic bag, puts the drink packet inside it, and secures the plastic bag over and under the injured man's head. Finally, he adds a damp towel on the injured man's forehead. This shot is remarkable because a conventional approach to filmmaking would simply have cut to the end result of the improvised bag on the injured man's forehead. After all, the point is to show Rawang taking care of the injured man. Here, however, each and every step involved in the process of caring, acts that are too insignificant and to count as action, is shown in its full duration. Indeed, one could argue that the content of the short demands such extended temporality to do justice to the slow and painstaking process of caring. With an absence of dialogue and music, and with only some traffic noise heard in the background, this long take of a stranger's kindness exemplifies Tsai's cinema of stillness, silence, and slowness. So thank you all for being so patient. I hope I've given you a sense of what I mean by a cinema of slowness and why Tsai's films are particularly suited to illustrate it. Thank you.
Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to respond to Lim Song-Hwee's interesting paper about the connections between Tsai Ming-liang's cinema of slowness and the emerging culture of slow movements today. I certainly look forward to reading the book when it appears in print. And I want to begin by briefly summarizing what I take to be the three key points of his lecture, and then I'll raise 4 questions that I hope will open up further discussion. First of all, Dr. Lim argues that the slowness of cinema should not be understood in terms of the objective measurement or the quantification of time. Just as our sense of time in everyday life is primarily a matter of experience, that is, a matter of psychical or subjective response, so too is the sense of time conveyed by a film. Time is a matter of the interiority of a subject, a matter of consciousness, an inner state induced by the subject's encounter with the world, and slowness and speed are subjective phenomena. In the case of cinema, it is how the viewer responds to the world evoked or created by the film. So that's the first point. The second point is that cinema is a temporal artifact to the second degree. All phenomena, everything that occurs, takes place in time. Nothing can happen. There can be no appearance without time. But the very being of cinema emphasizes temporality, because cinema is an art of time-based images. Images that are given a temporal organization for the end of producing a meaningful experience. Now, this means that the maker of slow cinema has some agency in inducing an intended response from the viewer. Cinema can convey the passage of time in different ways. So in Dr. Lim's quotation from the interview by Tsai Ming-liang, Tsai says that he wishes to convey the experience of real time, rather than the mere idea that a certain amount of time has lapsed. He would rather show a character smoking 5 cigarettes than give an image of 5 cigarette stubs. So while the experience of time when we view cinema is subjective, there can be objective factors in inducing an experience of slowness. And therefore, Dr. Lim points out that the slowness of cinema can in large part be ascertained from the quantitative measurement of the length and number of shots to arrive at the average shot length. So that's the second point. The third main point that he makes is that he attempts to connect the emergence of a cinema of slowness to that of the slow movement at the turn of the 21st century. He argues that their simultaneous emergence, and I quote, bespeaks a desire to formulate a different relationship to time and space, end quote. So whereas capitalist modernity or postmodernity is characterized by what David Harvey calls space-time compression, the slow movement attempts to counter such compression and the separation of the local and the global. In a related way, the cinema of slowness, exemplified by Tsai Ming-liang's film, depicts in its full duration processes of generous caring that transcend the self-interested processes of accumulation. Now, in my summary of the last point, I've engaged in some guesswork because I think the paper, the book, I'm sure, will specify in greater detail how the slow gestures of caring depicted in the film are linked to the imperatives of the slow movement. So my first question is a request for Dr. Lim to say more about the connections between the slow movement and caring. The second point I want to raise, the second area that I want to raise for discussion, concerns his argument that in slow cinema, time is not a matter of measurement. It seems to me that this argument is problematic and it needs to be qualified. First, the sense of time in terms of long and short, slow and fast, that is to say in terms of duration, is already a measurement, even if we don't measure quantitatively, but qualitatively, in terms of subjective sense and experience. This is precisely why a film director can calculate how he can achieve certain temporal effects in his craft. Second, the entire cultural phenomenon of slowness, whether we understand it in terms of a type of cinema or in terms of cultural movements such as slow food and the promotion of slow living, is also based on measurement. It seeks to slow down, that is to say, to provisionally reverse or arrest the speed of daily life, the accelerated pace of our daily experiences of time, dictated by the rhythms of contemporary capitalist space-time compression. As Marx said, the pace of life has to be fast, because if capital takes more time to circulate, this will slow down the speed and frequency of the realization of capital. That is to say, monetization, as they say in business talk, the conversion of the commodity into monetary profit. Circulation time is an additional cost that has to be added to the production process. The speed associated with postmodernity is the result of the appropriation of time by capitalist accumulation, so that circulation time can be brought down to a minimum. So there are, of course, many social and environmental costs to reducing circulation time. For example, the environmental damage caused by the use of fossil fuels in transportation, And of course, slow movements are concerned with these costs. My main point here is that in both slow cinema and the slow movement, time is fundamentally a matter of measurement. They are reactions that seek to counter the speed of time in the contemporary world. And this means that the difference between slow and fast cinema, slow movements and space-time compression is merely a matter of degree and not a qualitative difference. The third point I want to raise is a specific question about the gestures of care that are portrayed in full duration in the film. The injured man shown in the clip has a double in the film, and this is the first scene of the film that Dr. Lim spoke about. There is another character, also played by Li Kangsheng, who is a comatose invalid on life support. He is cared for by a coffee shop waitress, played by Chen Xiangqi. The various gestures of care, bathing the invalid, rubbing talcum powder on his back, etc., are also portrayed in full duration. But these actions have quite a different connotation from the gestures of care in the clip that was shown earlier. The oppressiveness of these actions is suggested by the intertextuality of music. In one scene, a song from the Cantonese opera, Big Hoi Kong Zhang, a mad monk of the Jade Green Sea, plays on the radio on her employer's dressing table. The opera's plot centers on the trials and tribulations of a self-sacrificing girl who was promised in marriage before she was born and taken into the household of her betrothed as a child. Her future husband has been critically ill since the age of 1, and she submits to marrying him following a superstitious Chinese tradition where the auspiciousness of a marriage can stimulate an invalid's recovery, In a later scene, while the waitress rubs talcum powder on the invalid's back, the radio plays a Mandarin song by the 1940s China-born Japanese singer, Li Xianglan. The English translation of the title is If Only We Had Met in My Maiden Days, 恨不相逢没嫁时. The song is about a woman who meets the man she loves only after she is trapped in an unhappy marriage. Its title, Professor Wendy Larson, who is in the audience, tells me, comes from the last line of A Virtuous Wife's Lament, a Tang Dynasty poem by Zhang Zi, a sorrowful plaint in a woman's lyric voice about the trumping of true love by chaste wifely fidelity. These intertextual references suggest that the waitress may be in a worse relation of miserable subjection to the invalid. In the film's most grotesque scene, the lady boss rubs body lotion on the waitress's hand and uses it as a tool to rub her invalid son's genitals to see if he can be stimulated. The sounds of forced masturbation recall the sounds of the waitress's clinical scrubbing of the invalid's body. They are the barest acts of bodily maintenance that do not involve any emotional connection, where the waitress is a mere instrument without consciousness or feeling. They mirror, but in a very dark way, the gestures of care that Rawang performs on the other character played by Li Kangsheng. But they are shot with the same long take, which suggests that slow cinema also gives a sense of the smothering oppressiveness of time. So I would like to ask Dr. Lim to say more about the contrast between these two forms of caring that are shot in an identical way. My final comment is more abstract. I was wondering whether or not to bring up this point, but Dr. Lim's paper actually brings up Heidegger, and I can't speak about time without mentioning Heidegger. When time is understood in terms of measurement, we view time as a form of presence. Here, it doesn't matter whether presence is that of an object or the presence of interior consciousness, the presence of experience. Now, only what is present can be measured. But we can also understand time in a radically different way. Instead of thinking of time on the basis of presence, we can see presence as something that is produced by temporality. Nothing is, nothing can be present if there was not already time. As the German philosopher Martin Heidegger says, and I quote, "Temporality is not a being at all. It is not but rather temporalizes itself. Any understanding of time as a presence that can be measured, necessarily takes time for granted. It obscures the essence of time by confusing time with beings that are already intratemporal, beings that are already within time. Now, Heidegger called this the vulgar conception of time, and he argued that it leads to inauthentic existence. We become absorbed by the beings around us, and we treat time as an objective presence. We forget the original connection between human existence and temporality. Now, because temporalization is that which opens us up to others and gives us access to each other, the vulgar conception of time also destroys our possibilities for authentic being with others. So there is a clear line between Heidegger and French existentialism. I sometimes say half in jest that Tsai Ming-liang is an existentialist French filmmaker in a Taiwanese, Malaysian, Chinese body. How can we understand the cinema of slowness in terms of authentic temporality instead of duration? What implications does this kind of slowness have for how we can live our lives today? Thank you for your patience.